Well, with that, thank you all for joining us for the Learned Lunch on Healthy Buildings Materials. For those of you who may be joining for the first time, I am Patience Malaba. I am the Executive Director at the Housing Development Consortium, and I want to thank Lauren on our team, Member Services Director, for coordinating this event alongside Megan, who I know helped pull it all together. But let me say this about the importance of the conversation that we're about to have. HDC's work is operating at the intersection of three crises that all of us have consistently acknowledged. And that is the affordable housing crisis, the racial equity, persistent inequities, and climate change. And we're continuously challenging ourselves to work towards not only providing affordable housing, but making sure that when we do, that housing is healthy, resilient, and clean, and promotes the resiliency of the communities we serve. Because one thing is clear for all of us, and that is the reality that the climate change crisis is one that is a ticking time. We know that the fuse is really short and burning really fast on climate change. And as we advance strategies on addressing that, we're often trying to balance that with the reality of the tight budget margins that affordable housing providers have to deal with. And that's why our Exemplary Buildings Program work has consistently evaluated strategies, guidelines to support all of us as a collective sector to fully advance strategies that support sustainable buildings, and in doing so, document the best practices that are effective. So over the past months, we have been through the task force developing a healthy buildings materials and matrix. You will hear today from distinguished speakers and partners that we've worked with. We have Gladys on the line, and you hear more of the lengthy introduction from SKL. We also have Teresa from the Healthy Buildings Network, as well as Erika from Toxic Free Future, who worked with the task force in developing this tool. Our hope and goal is that in this conversation, you will understand first the objective of the tool, but secondly, how to use the tool as affordable housing providers, and to really understand some of the toxic materials that continue to be prevalent in our market, and have a deeper conversation as we go on here in how collectively we can be looking out for those materials, and how in your planning, in your early designs, in your development projects, you can be looking out for those materials in ways that are really budget aligned. And there's a lot of intentionality that has gone behind this work. So without further ado, I would like to hand over for discussion and introduction, but I will make just a quick pitch for the way we're continuing to approach sustainability in the work within HDC. We've streamlined our work into a full HDC Sustainable Buildings Program that has a two-track. And the first track is the Exemplary Buildings Program that is focused on new buildings. How do we proactively plan for sustainability there? And the second track that we've streamlined into an arm here is for existing buildings. And that work continues to be underway with a task force that has been looking at resilient retrofits. How do we truly decarbonize existing buildings? And we're looking to create tools to support and build that capacity. So adding that context for all of you as members to know resources that are available within HDC and places where you can continue to collaborate with fellow members on the work around sustainability. And with that, I will pivot over to the Healthy Buildings Materials team. Lauren will take us off from here and introduce the distinguished speakers here.
Great, thank you, Patience, for that context and teeing us up today. I have the honor of introducing our presenters, all really amazing women with very amazing bios. So bear with me while I try to do each one justice. So first we have Erika Schreder, who leads Toxic Free Futures Research Program. Focuses on exploring the impacts of the use of toxic chemicals in products. Research topics have included tracing the path of toxic chemicals from home to waterways, measuring the impact on exposure of removing flame retardants from products, and biomonitoring for PFAS, flame retardants, and chemicals found in plastics. Erika obtained her MS from the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Michigan, and she has a BS in biology from MIT. Next, we have HTC's own Gladys Ly-Au Young, who is a founding partner of Sundberg Kennedy Ly-Au Young Architects, SKL Architects. And those of you who know Gladys know that she's driven by a social purpose to design earth-friendly, community-based places that function well, create belonging, and promote health and well-being. Gladys holds a social justice graduate certificate from Harvard Extension School. She has a master's of science in sustainable design from Carnegie Mellon and a bachelor of architecture from Washington State University. And she's been working in the sustainable design field for 30 years. She serves on the Cultural Space Agency's Governing Council, Seattle 2030 District's Board of Directors, ILFI's Organizational Equity Technical Advisory Group, and the AIA Seattle Honor Awards co-chair. And then last we have Teresa McGrath, who's Chief Research Officer with the Healthy Building Network. She has prior experience in government, nonprofit, and industry, and she brings a wealth of holistic knowledge and multi-sector experience to the HBN team. She also spent 9 years as the senior managing toxicologist at NSF International's Green Chemistry programs and 2 years at the EPA in the design for the environment branch of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. So very impressive panelists today. Thank you all so much for lending your time and your expertise. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Erika.
Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction, and Patience for the inspiring words to kick us off. So happy to be here today. Oh, this is not what I want. There we go. So happy to be here today and to have this opportunity to share this with all of you. So thanks for coming. Very briefly, what we do here at Toxic Free Future is we have 3 main ways in which we work. The first is through our scientific research, which you've heard a little bit about already, and that informs the advocacy that we do in the policy realm, both at the state level and at the federal level, as well as assisting other states. And then our market transformation work, in which we're working with the nation's largest retailers to move towards safer products, get the toxic chemicals out of their products. So my job today is to give you a little bit of framework around why we need healthier materials and affordable housing, and also just to orient you to some of the policy activity that's already happening in Washington State that affects materials used in housing. So I'm sure all of you know that one of the things that we need to consider is that when we're talking about affordable housing is that the people who are most vulnerable to toxic exposures often live in that type of housing. So that includes children, people with disabilities, as well as older adults and others. And we are concerned about the chemicals that they're exposed to in their homes from the products in those homes, but also they're being exposed from other sources, including, in many cases, local Superfund sites that have historically been sited near they haven't been cited, but the federally subsidized housing has been cited near Superfund sites. And unfortunately, federal law does not prevent the use of toxic chemicals in building materials. And we need to remember to look at this through an environmental justice lens, because in general, we know that pollution sources and contaminated sites are concentrated in BIPOC communities. And when we have these toxic exposures, those only adding to other stressors that are consistent, such as poverty and racial discrimination. And there has been research that's found that for at least some toxic chemicals, such as phthalates and flame retardants, we see higher levels in affordable housing. We also know that renovation of housing with safer materials results in reduced exposure, including from some of our own research with flame retardants. But this is a graphic to help us think about the whole whole life cycle of chemicals. And this one is a graphic that we created specifically for PFAS, but I think we can use it to walk through the different stages and remember, help remind us about the different things that we need to keep in mind. So first stage is the production of the actual chemical, which generally results in releases to air and water, as well as exposure to workers. There's the manufacturing of a product. Again, exposures to workers, releases to air and water. And then once the product is made, we can all be exposed in our homes, our schools, and in our workplaces. And then after we're done with the product, fortunately, the exposures don't stop, because whether it goes to compost, landfill, or incinerator, we see the chemicals going out again into air and water, ultimately contaminating drinking water, fish, and wildlife. An example that I wanted to share with you is related to PVC and vinyl chloride. I'm sure you remember the derailment that took place in February in Ohio. And one of the scariest things about that is that it included 6 rail cars that contained vinyl chloride, which is a carcinogen and a very hazardous gas, and happens to be the chemical that's used as a building block to make PVC. And so after that incident, we wanted to look at, what are the everyday impacts of PVC production? Clearly the transport of vinyl chloride creates a risk and a hazard for communities, but what is also happening every day? So we learned that altogether there are 19 vinyl chloride and PVC resin factories in the US, and they're producing between 10 and 20 billion pounds every year. And they're releasing vinyl chloride into the air. So they've reported in 1 year releasing more than 400,000 pounds of vinyl chloride. And again, that's a carcinogen. And of course, building materials are the #1 use of PVC. So this is all very relevant to what we're talking about today. There's another great case study that was done by HBN and RDC that helps us think about the production phase and what the impacts are. We've been concerned about spray foam because it contains persistent toxic flame retardants. And the base material isocyanates is a leading cause of occupational asthma. And they looked at what's happening during the production phase. So they found that production of one of the key ingredients results in 47 million pounds of hazardous waste each year and release of more than 500,000 pounds to air and water. And 90% of the inputs to create this chemical are hazardous. They compared that to glass fiber production, which also creates hazardous waste, but in much lower quantities and much less release to air and water, and a much smaller percentage of the chemical inputs are hazardous. This slide has a lot of information on it, and so I don't expect you to take it all in, but I wanted to include it for your kind of future reference. With some of the key classes of chemicals that we're concerned about when they're used in building materials and why we're concerned. Some of these are chemicals that I'm sure are very familiar to all of us, such as formaldehyde. Some of them may be new to you, like cyclosiloxanes, but the more we get transparency in what chemicals are in products, the more we learn that there are additional chemicals of concern. So I'm going to give you a brief tour of some of the regulations in Washington State that do apply to chemicals in building materials. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Evergreen Sustainable Development Standard, which is administered here in Washington State by the Department of Commerce and has the requirements for affordable housing that's built through the Housing Trust Fund. And I've just done a quick summary of some of the key restrictions on chemicals, toxic chemicals in building materials for those projects. There's kind of a limited number that are mandatory, but a longer list that are optional, such as Projects can get optional points by choosing paint that's free of alkyl phenol ethoxylates, which are hormone disruptors, sealants free of phthalates. Projects can get points by choosing flooring that's red list free or just going with no vinyl or no carpet. They can, if they do choose carpet, they can get points for getting carpet that's free of PFAS and fly ash. They can get points for not using spray foam at all, or just keeping it away from the large applications. And then finally, they can choose no or low formaldehyde composite wood. So that's the specific restrictions we have under the Evergreen Sustainable Development Standards. But I wanted to take a step back and talk about what we've done in our state over the last couple of decades in building a really strong framework to create systemic change in what chemicals are used in products and moving towards safer products. So there are 4 key pillars. The first is transparency. We have some great laws that require disclosure of chemicals in products and allow our state to actually call in information to help create safer products. We have laws and regulations that ban the worst. They phase out some of the most dangerous chemicals like PFAS and lead from specific products. And our state has used a hazard-based framework. So it's using what's called chemical hazard assessments to look at what's the inherent toxicity of this compound. Are there chemicals that are safer? Are there materials that are safer? So we're looking toward how can we actually make the best choices based on what's safest. And then finally, programs that incentivize the safest. And I'll give you a little more information about that at the end. So the key program that we have at our State Department of Ecology and with working closely with the State Department of Health is called the Safer Products for Washington program. And it was created by a law that passed in 2019 and was really groundbreaking in a number of ways. The first is that it tackles classes of chemicals. And that's really important because when it puts a ban into place, it makes it much harder for manufacturers to simply substitute a very similar but also problematic chemical. They really have to rethink how they're doing things and hopefully move to a safer solution. The program is hazard-based. It does require that the agency find a safer alternative before a ban goes into place. And it also has a framework that has the agency identify priority products. So it's starting with the products that will make the most difference. And then also very important is that the legislature actually gave the experts at the Department of Ecology the authority to ban, restrict, or require disclosure. And that is what they have done. So this was just announced a couple of weeks ago, the final rule, which is the result of the first round of activity under this law. So I've just highlighted the chemicals and products that relate to building materials, but this gives you a little bit of a flavor for what they've done. And it's really the most significant action that's ever been taken by a state to restrict chemicals in products. And we're really, really proud of what's been accomplished at our state agencies. So just real quickly, PFAS will be banned in carpets and rugs as of January 2025, and in indoor furnishings as of January 2026. Phthalates will no longer be allowed in vinyl flooring as of January 2025. And one of the most important restrictions that this regulation puts in place is it bans the use of organohalogen flame retardants, so the entire class of organohalogen flame retardants, in the plastic external enclosures of electric and electronic products. And that's phased in between 2025 and 2028. And no other state or country has done this. But Ecology didn't stop there. They have just last week announced the draft list of chemicals that they'll be addressing in the next cycle. And so they are currently taking comment on this list. It includes lead and cadmium, brominated and chlorinated compounds. So that's a very large class. And that will allow them to address vinyl chloride and PVC, which, as we've talked about, are very important in the building materials sector. BTEX compounds, which we can also find in things like paint thinners, finishes, formaldehyde releasers, where they are found. Cyclic volatile methylsiloxanes are found in sealants. And if we don't do something about it, may become increasingly used as replacements for PFAS. And then finally, 6-PPD, which is an anti-ozonant found in tires that is killing our salmon. Finally, I just wanted to share a little information about this product replacement program that is run under the Department of Ecology. And the concept behind this is to provide assistance to businesses, organizations that want to get rid of their toxic products and move to something safer. A couple of my favorite examples are firefighting foam. The department was able to provide resources to allow fire stations to switch out their firefighting foam that contained PFAS for PFAS-free. And then also worked with dry cleaners to move away from a toxic solvent, and many moved to wet cleaning, which doesn't require a solvent at all. So as far as I know, this hasn't been applied in the affordable housing sector, but we've been talking to the folks there, and I really think there's some potential, and kind of lit up when patients talked about the work that HDC is doing with existing buildings. Maybe there's something that could be done in terms of switch out to make those homes safer with some of these resources. All right, thank you so much. And I will pass it on to Gladys to give you some more details about the work that's been done under the Exemplary Building Program.
Erika and Gladys, before we switch to you, Gladys, Erika, there's a clarifying question in the chat. Does this mean that items that contain these chemicals cannot be sold in stores in Washington? And then is there any regulation for products sold online and then sold in Washington?
Yes, it means that they can't be sold in any way in Washington. So it doesn't matter whether that's, in a physical building or online, that will be illegal to sell them in Washington. Thanks for asking.
All right. Thank you, Erika. So are we switching over, Lauren? All right, here, can you all see my screen? No response means yes, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. All right, Control L. All right. Hi, hello everyone again. I see a lot of familiar names in their participant list. So thank you for your support. And hello again, my name is Gladys Ly-Au Young, and with SKL. So we are, as you, Lauren mentioned, mission-driven, creating spaces for gathering, learning, living, I like to say nurturing within our communities. And then one thing that I want to show is that we are registered under the Just 2.0 label, which is kind of like a nutrition label for socially just firms. So you could check it out as well. And I feel a little bit intimidated, kind of being sandwiched between these two experts, the women, Erika and Teresa, they are the experts. So ask them the difficult questions, don't ask me. So, but then with that intimidation, I just wanted to walk you through the work that the three organizations work together with on this matrix for the HDC. Is called the Healthy Material Matrix. You can find it under their website, under Exemplary Buildings Program. If you click on the Our Results Information and Tools, you will find that brand new Healthy Material Matrix. And this is supposed to be a easy to use guide to shift to safer materials. And now with our initial conversation with HDC, so we try to correlate the chemicals of concern, some of which Erika kind of mentioned, with their enterprise green communities criteria, and the local Washington adopted version of that criteria is called the ESDS. And that, how it correlates is what, the initial task. And with our collaboration with HTC all the way to the right, you can see how, if you are familiar with their guide, color ranking guide, you will be familiar with their color coding and tying it with their work with this matrix. That green meaning the best in class, the redder color means worst in class recommendation. So how this matrix is organized is that we organize it with the CSI divisions, so help you generate your specification. And of the most important column is the chemicals of concern. And then with our recommendation, the recommendation, as I said, is tied in with the color coding of the HTC work. And then we also, you can see the correlation with the two criteria that I mentioned. So if we zoom into this matrix a little bit, then highlighting, okay, if you're going to look for insulation or paint, then this is how it looks like. So for insulation, if you're looking for bad insulation, the chemicals of concern you should know about is formaldehyde. And then our recommendation is to choose fiberglass bad material insulation and make sure it's formaldehyde free. And here are some products. This matrix is supposed to be like an open source. You could download it, you can use it however you wanted to, and also give feedback. It's a continuously updated, because as you could see, if we have product names, meaning that as the industry change or the being more adopted, there will be more materials. It's supposed to be a guide to make it easy for our HTC members and anybody else to specify healthier materials. So on the slide, you can see on the bottom there, I included links to everything. So when you get the slides, you could easily kind of review it at your own time. So if you feel like you can't take it all in, you could look at it later. And then, so with that, the recommendation that we made to use fiber bat insulation all the way to the right, you can see that it kind of fits into the, it's kind of okay, because there's other materials that is recommended by the HTC, but those materials, like the best in class, might not be easily cannot use in the affordable housing sector. And that's kind of how we weigh our recommendation. And then for paint, you can see that APE and VOC should be your chemicals of concern, and then recommendation, and then here's some products that you could choose from. And Sherwin-Williams ProMar 200 shouldn't cost you more. So you can see a little dollar sign too, so that, of course, cost is all, like everybody has, like is different shade depend on the region, right? So this is kind of like a little bit of a guide. It's like, it should be cost neutral. So if you are given a price that that is cost a lot more for these categories, maybe you should ask more questions. So that's the intent of the cost impact guide. It's not like an absolute guide, and use it, as a guide to when you talk to contractors. And then the next section is tying in a little bit with the green communities criteria. If you don't know what it looks like, here it is. So for that criteria, there are many different sections. So under 6 is your materials. And you see a bunch of optional items and some that is what they are required. And healthier material is only one of those criteria. And under which it looks like this. There's only 5 product categories they mention. But how we correlate it with our matrix is that, okay, using our paint and insulation examples again, paint, you can see the same chemical of concerns being highlighted in the green communities criteria and also in our matrix. And insulation is the same correlation. So that's what we meant by it's correlated. And I'm going to run through some quick resources, and there's only a limited number of resources I'm going to share, because if I'm going to share everything, you guys going to be here all day, but I don't think you guys wanted to spend all that time with us on a lunch. But for this, sometimes I feel like when I talk to clients, it's really hard to kind of like visualize what we're talking about. If you start talking about chemicals, you lose them really quickly, or you lose. It's kind of hard to kind of correlate. So if you have a graphics like this is by the Parsons School. They have a healthy materials lab and a specific section for healthy affordable housing. And here it is. So our paint and insulation examples again. So if you look at your paint, you're trying to tell people how bad things are, so you could like see the spider web of correlation. It's a neurotoxin, it kind of causes asthma, reproductive harm, endocrine disruptor, and same as insulation. So you could show quickly what are the health impacts. So the link is also here. And then the International Living Future Institute, they have like the whole section of affordable housing. They have cohorts that you could join. One of the projects that we have is cohort 3. So you could like be peer-to-peer learning from each other and gain like troubleshoot your issues together. And then I'm just want to point out that for Erika also mentioned that number 1 step is transparency. You kind of need to know what is bad about the materials before you could actually react to it. So then transparency is number 1. Is all part of a vetting process. So here you could download like a vetting checklist, and you get building product selection guide, and also the IFI also kind of correlate the core certification requirement with the enterprise green communities criteria. So that's another valuable resource for you to reference. And also I help also with the affordable housing material list. And that is, IOFI is a reviewer of our matrix. So that's how our work is all kind of interrelated, because we need everyone to help bring more healthy materials to the affordable housing sector. And another easy to use guide is they did all the work for you is the Declare database. So I like to, if you go there, I like to use the CSI division. You go there and you click on it. If we want, following our paint examples again, there's like paint. You click on it, then, okay, if you know why we recommend the Outer Spec 500, you could quickly see that it's red list free. A red list is like chemicals are the worst in class chemicals that are polluting our environment, bioaccumulate up the food chain and harm everyone up and down, everybody. And so planet. And so then you could also see that it's VOC free and the ingredients is disclosed. So it's really easy. And then HBN is, Teresa is from HBN. So I feel a little, but I just wanted to kind of bring this, as like a toolkit, like things you could use. If as another graphic too, if you want to show your client, if your paint, here's your chemical right there and your hazard, which has a key. It is really easy to use and it's very, like ties directly to your health impacts. So that's another little graphics you could use. And of course, everybody really should like know about their home free product guide. And here's that green to red reference guide. And that for the paint example, again, you go there and you click on paint, it tells you again what is good and what is bad. So how easy is that? Oh, sorry. Okay, here. So I think I'm gonna with all that, sometimes a little intimidating, you feel like, oh, it's a lot of time you need to spend in specifying healthy materials. But if you have some resources, some tool, and that kind of want to show with this project that it might not be as intimidating as you might think. So, and I also want to tie in a little bit with what Erika just said about environmental justice in building materials. She said that pollution sources and contaminated sites are concentrated in BIPOC communities. And then she said toxic exposure and add to other stressors such as poverty and race discrimination make it disproportionately worse for some sector of our population. So that's why for some projects that we do, this one is the New Way Re Village. New Way Re means new journey, and the client is creating a new model for place-based affordable housing with supportive services for people experiencing homelessness, and that for the population that we serve, that we try to, we have like a list of things that we trying to include in the project, but we also know our limits, right? So there is like a parking lot of products that we know that is harder to achieve. So we put it in a parking lot so that we could concentrate on effort in bringing healthy materials. And here's the list. You could see that some of it should be cost neutral to you. And that it might like Vapor Shield, Wrap Shield might cost a little bit more than the Tyvek product, but other stuff is like, it's is pretty doable for affordable housing, with the exception of some of the things I highlighted. The fiberglass windows and openings are more expensive, and their flooring, like no vinyl flooring, could be more expensive. But that is the reason why you kind of set your goals in the early. You work with your contractor supplier, you find grants, and you like work together, balance your design, and to kind of try to see whether you can make that happen. And the reason why I highlighted the vinyl is also echo what Erika and Teresa is going to highlight to the PVC. So kind of bring it all home to everyone, I guess maybe for everyone who's in the building industry, is that why is it such a bad problem, PVC? I think it's only like the human species do this. You make a whole bunch of stuff and you throw away a whole bunch of stuff. I think it's only unique to the humankind. So for plastic, we made a whole bunch of plastic and we throw away most of it. So we say, you would say, okay, it's recycle. What's your problem? But that 9% of it is the stats that we recycle. That means 91% of it is not. And so what do we do with it? We burn it, which is that, like that is that, like the whole Ohio train that Erika mentioned, it just creates so much toxic materials in our environment. And what we do with it, we try to bury it in our land and we dump it in our ocean. And it really creates really detrimental contamination to our natural environment. And of the stuff we make, we make a lot of stuff for packaging, but the building industry also use a lot of it. And so that's how we directly are responsible for this contamination of the environment. And then I will end with this as a tie-in with everyone's message, is that why do we care for the affordable housing? Is because the low-income populations that we house our affordable housing folks are disproportionately impacted from the negative health impacts associated with building materials due to increased exposure to toxic materials in their homes, jobs, and the environment. And that the root causes of health disparities are systemic and is really disproportionate, impacting our BIPOC population. And that is the reason why we need to care and that we need to advocate and ask for more non-toxic materials for affordable housing. So with that, I wanted to pass it over to Teresa for her presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Gladys, and thank you, Erika, for teeing me up and making this presentation more streamlined. You all have kind of talked about the why from all of this, why materials matter, and how do we prefer safer materials. So I'm going to be talking today about a tool we called Informed. That talks about how we can start to look at our materials early in the design process before we even select a particular manufacturer or a specific trade name. We can start thinking of materials early in the design process. So that's what Informed is all about. A little bit about, let's see here, forward. There we go. A little bit about HBN. HBN is a nonprofit. We have over 20 years of experience in green chemistry and safer building materials. Our role, I lead the research team there, and we research what building materials are made of, what are the human health and environmental concerns with those materials throughout their product life cycle, and then we help create tools and solutions to help project teams select healthier products. We're driven by our vision that all people and the planet thrive when the environment is free of toxic chemicals. So Erika did a great job of saying the why, Erika and Gladys both, but wanted to put some urgency behind it. So we focus on building materials for a number of reasons as HBN, and we do it partly because of the sheer volume of materials that are used in buildings, and also how intimately we use and are exposed to building materials every day. And a recent report came out that projected that the world is adding 2.5 trillion square feet of buildings by 2060. So this is an area equal to the current global building stock. So we're expected to double it in the next 30 or so years. That's a massive amount of materials. And the decisions we make today on what materials we use in those buildings will have a lingering impact on the world that we live in tomorrow. And the unfortunate reality is that many toxic substances are used to make the building materials that we commonly use. On the flip side, there's lots of building materials out there that use healthier materials. So our tool is intended to point you towards those materials early in the design process. Now, materials modeling is standard practice for many project teams. It's used to optimize energy use, carbon footprint, water use, waste. But it's not been used as a standard practice for material selection or material health evaluations, mostly because that didn't exist until now. And Informed fills this critical gap. So Informed is that modeling tool and gives teams this head start towards improved outcomes, and again, designed to be used early in the process. So materials modeling is going to be a central, we think, to sustainability efforts. By using materials modeling, we can provide guidance to select safer material types first before landing on specific manufacturer products. So this will be a key distinguishing feature of this program than any other sort of certification program. That's not what this is. This is a program that's intended to provide this early guidance. And it's intended to point people to those specific or to the safer product types that are going to set you up to meet your sustainability goals. What this does is it gives the power back to the users to make those informed decisions. And it also considers product impacts throughout the product life cycle. So all of our guidance accounts for health impacts across the product's entire life cycle. So a product is not considered safer if it's not safe for everyone in that along the supply chain. Currently, our guidance spans 11 divisions, focused primarily on product types that make up interior spaces like flooring, paint, insulation, countertops, but we're expanding into other product categories like roofing, waterproofing. I think next is going to be ceilings and windows are probably next in line. Oh, and fire stopping and fireproofing are in the queue next. We've translated our guidance into CSI master format, making it easier for you to find and compare and specify these safer product type options in your projects. So Gladys shared the red to green guidance. What this is all of our guidance, all of our research on materials is distilled into this tidy, approachable guidance that informs users at that broad product level using this, we hope, intuitive color ranking system, this red to green system, to help users easily identify what to avoid and what to prefer. And the power of this, and I'll show you an example on the next slide, is the biggest opportunities to improve on material health perspective is not necessarily jumping from worst in class all the way to best in class. That's not what we're asking people to do. We're asking people to take incremental steps towards safer materials. So if all you can do is jump into from red into orange, like we want to celebrate that, that's actually where some of the biggest opportunities for improvement lie, is just getting out of the red zone. And again, we know it's not always possible to specify the yellow and above. This is an example of an excerpt from our insulation product guidance. This is just showing you some of the board insulation products and how they compare to each other. So the biggest opportunities using this example is to get out of XPS insulation. That's step one. Then you can make more incremental improvements by moving from mineral board up to maybe unfaced fiberglass board insulation. So that's what we're hoping to communicate with these tools, is that there's big opportunities to step up wherever you can get to and what's ever manageable for your project. So knowing this big picture is key to approaching finishes with a strategy that's hopefully realistic and feasible for your project. Again, not always about switching every product from that red to green, but by seeing, assessing what you've got and seeing those potential areas of concern, maybe adding some information like square footage or quantities. With this information, project teams can prioritize and decide what product types would have the highest impact, because we know you can't tackle everything at once. And when it comes to ingredients in products, it's, you know, not quite the same as carbon, in that all carbon impacts can be normalized to one number, but rather it's by taking these steps up in any category, even if it's a relatively small amount of square footage, these can have big impacts and very meaningful impacts throughout the supply chain. And as Gladys mentioned, there are many examples of healthier materials that don't cost more and still have great performance. Great example of that is paints. We find that the paints that meet our guidance are cost neutral to the paints that are standard practice. So in fact, some people are choosing best in class paints already, and they're already part of their standard material selection. But being mindful about that from the get-go will help you measure the impacts that those choices have. So let's show an example. So this is a recent example of affordable housing project that used Informed to make healthier material choices. So you can see here that the team was able to move away from worst in class products and towards product types in the yellow and green, but not always landing in the yellow and green. And again, that is still trying to meet their performance and cost and project requirements. But they were still able to make some big improvements towards safer materials, and then can share this information. We have a case study that I can share around. We have a case study on this that project teams can use to prove what's possible, and to use this, peer example to show that safer material types are achievable. So I wanted to end on a couple more slides, but I wanted to switch over to some stories of impact. So we've been talking about kind of, in theory, moving up towards safer materials. I want to start to put some numbers on that and tell you kind of what the impacts are that we're talking about here, what's possible for a given project, and what happens when we scale these impacts across the life cycle of a building, or when we scale them further to all buildings. Now, our buildings are increasingly being made out of plastic. Love Gladys's slide on that, so I'll have to steal that at some point, Gladys. Building materials are the world's largest user of plastics behind packaging. And while building materials are thought of as durable, long-lasting products, and the reality is many of these plastic materials are thrown out after only a short use period. Carpets, for example, are mostly made of plastic and are typically discarded after 3 to 6 years of use. And carpet is going to be the example I'm going to use throughout the rest of the next 3 slides. I'm going to pick on carpet for a little bit. So carpet is typically made of vinyl or PVC. So both Gladys and Erika talked about the impacts of PVC manufacturing. PVC uses mercury, asbestos, and PFAS during the manufacturing process. So it's one of the most impactful plastic materials, or materials generally, in the world. If we make the simple step of moving from, in this case, red to orange, so going from carpet with vinyl to carpet with no vinyl, we can avoid 1.9 tons of PVC plastic per office building per application. We used office buildings because we happen to have a baseline for those. So apologies for not putting this into affordable housing lens, but this is illustrative, so we'll read across nicely. So let's scale that. That's like a step up. Let's think about taking a bigger leap up. So let's think about the impacts. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot this slide. So Erika mentioned the train derailment, and what it was carrying was vinyl chloride, of course, destined for PVC. And as Erika mentioned, the building industry is the #1 user of PVC. So in all likelihood, those train cars were destined to make a stop, to be used in building materials of some sort, whether there's pipes or flooring or siding. That is in all likelihood where those train cars were headed. So think for a minute, if those train cars were filled not with PVC or with vinyl chloride, but with, let's say, copper, if it was being used for water pipes, or wood, if it was being used for flooring, or any other material, would have a much different impact on this community. We probably would never have heard about it, honestly, if that was the case. So it's the demand for these PVC products that's driving the use of and the exposure of these communities to toxic chemicals. Okay, so let's take a step up. So again, I'm sort of using plastic as a lens here. But if we move from just from carpet with vinyl, which is standard practice, to let's just swap half of it out with linoleum and half of it with carpet with no vinyl. So let's say we're not ready to get rid of all of our carpet quite yet. And you could swap linoleum with any other product in that green zone. It doesn't have to be linoleum. And the math would be similar. Over the course of 50 years of a building, which is, generously a lifespan of a building, we could avoid over 100 tons of plastic in one office building over that 50 years. Now let's scale that to all office buildings in the US, just office buildings in the US, and just swapping half of that carpet for a non-plastic material. We could avoid 28 million tons of plastic. And to give you a sense of what that is, like what does that number mean? That's almost equivalent to the amount of total plastic that the US discards every year. And this is just one building material type, and this is just one building typology. So imagine the impacts if we were to scale this across multiple building types, multiple building material types. The impacts are huge and definitely need to be paid attention to from an embodied carbon perspective, and from an environmental justice perspective, and from a global warming perspective. So finally, I'd like to discuss how our guidance aligns with carbon and climate goals. So reducing our building's carbon footprint is a key sustainability goal for many project teams. And you can achieve some of those reductions by making the building more energy efficient, which is called operational carbon. And you can achieve even more reductions by choosing products that use less energy and release less greenhouse gases throughout their life cycle. And that's referred to as embodied carbon. And so we compared our guidance to the embodied carbon guidance to see if there was alignment or if we were providing conflicting guidance. And I'm just sharing you a preview of our research results from insulation. And what is exciting is that the products that are best in class from a material health perspective, which is on the left, and when we compare that to the embodied carbon product guidance on the right, we can see that product types are optimized for material health also are best in class for lower embodied carbon. And these product types have these things in common. They are plant-based or mineral-based, and they last a long time, and they are a high-value product. So this means that, that we can optimize both embodied carbon and material health. On the flip side, we also see that some product types that are sort of middle of the road or preferred from an embodied carbon perspective, such as polyiso, EPS, open cell spray foam, those are worst in class from a material health perspective. So this means that we have to pay attention to both material health and embodied carbon when we select safer materials. All right, I think that wraps up. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to be handing it back to Gladys to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think I'm supposed to hand it back to Lauren to wrap us up. But thank you, though. It was great. I think it's a good storyline. And I think I just wanted to say that when I was in Living Future 23, Teresa's informed session was like out the door. It was standing room only. And I think it was really helpful that we could, there was time to do a calculation. So the quantifying that, that we were Teresa's showing us, we're able to have a worksheet is really easy, kind of like a math that you could quantify for yourself how much of these toxic materials you're using. Sometimes when you talk to a client, like you could demonstrate, you have to know what are the chemicals of concern, but it's also very helpful the magnitude, right? So if you have a lot of the bad stuff, then maybe that would be a justification of making a case to get rid of a lot of that bad stuff. So that's what the informed tool is really helpful. It's really easy to do the math. And so it kind of feels good that you could quantify, wow, in paint, I think the exercise we did was paint. You could calculate how much PVC plastic was in paint. It was like, who knows, right? Anyway, okay, great. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge and insights. If anyone wants to stay and ask a few questions, Teresa and Erika and Gladys, I'm not sure if you have a few moments. If there's any questions.
Happy to answer questions.
And you can go ahead and unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. I'm a silence filler, and I'm trying not to give you all an opportunity.
Yes, I think I'd be interested to hear from the audience if they've had a chance to use that HDC matrix, that product guidance, and if I guess I know it's relatively new, so perhaps no one's had a chance to use it, but I'd be interested to know if there's any like roadblocks that people are finding, or where people are getting stuck if they're trying to use healthier materials. I would love to hear that.
Well, and Teresa, I have to admit that this is newly released, and even beyond that, we've been so slammed that we have not had an opportunity to do wide promotion. And so those of you on the call have been kind of the first who are privy to a lot of this information. We're going to be doing a lot wider and broader promotion of this in the coming weeks. There is a question about how often the matrix will be updated. I think as we get information in, it's an easy update, and we definitely want that feedback from folks who are using it, and we can update it on a regular basis for sure.
Yeah, I
Any
think
other
it's also
comments?
only on certain CSI line items. So it would be great if the market is gaining traction into, more materials that we could add more line items as well.
Yeah, and I'll add that we're also, it's newly published, but we're also creating some versions that are simplified that can be shared with, audiences that aren't necessarily going to connect with the details, but where it would be helpful to be able to communicate the importance of certain decisions. If it's a policymaker you're asking for funds from, or, whatever it is, the decision makers, where you want to be able to communicate what things you want to do different from what's standard and why. So those are additional materials that will be forthcoming.
I think, Erika, what you're showing on what's coming up, like in terms of the Washington State, the different cycles you have and what is being restricted, what is coming. I think that is super, super fascinating and interesting. And I think that information is on your website, right?
Yes, that is available.
Yeah, that's super exciting to actually see any kind of on the policy level, what is coming and what is going to be passed. And I think that's tying in what I think what Patience is saying, that, some of the work that HDC is going to be doing as well, right?
Hey, well, thanks everyone. Thank you to our presenters, and thanks for everyone for joining us, and really appreciate this information. And we will be coming out with more and new iterations of this, and really doing what we can to promote healthy materials, because I think today we all understand why that's so important. So thank you all again, and make sure to check out our Exemplary Building website for the matrix. And have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gladys.